Welcome to Sparked,
the podcast where stories ignite confidence.
and bold women light the way.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the Sparked podcast. I'm Ellie.
I'm Leah.
And I'm Mira.
We are three freshmen who created the Sparked podcast to spotlight female trailblazers who are making a real change in the world.
We started this podcast because as freshmen, we are just beginning to explore who we want to be and what we want to pursue in our lives. Each episode, we will talk to a woman who has broken barriers, built their career with purpose, and most importantly, found their spark.
Today, we are honored to be speaking with Annette King, the producer, director, and CEO of Splicer Films, whose powerful films turn stories into movements. Ms. King, thank you so much for joining us for our first episode. And well, we'd love to start by learning, a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about your background and where you're from?
Yes. Well, thank you, Leah and Mira and Ellie and the Sparked team for having me on your podcast. It's an honor to be your first guest. As you know, we've met in the Casti School. My name is Annette King, and I'm the producer and director here at Splicer Films, but I'm also the CEO and founder. And my background started, really at the intersection of journalism and business. As a film producer, everything sparked with me starting my BA at the University of Texas and getting my MBA at Florida Atlantic University. And before founding Splicer Films, my background was in technology sales. I was in business development. I loved social entrepreneurship. I even started my first startup before 2020. And just having the idea around, business and film and more journalism, that mix of journalistic integrity and business acumen is really what allows me to run my production company. And I realized that it's not just about filmmaking, but creating measurable social impact. So the business acumen comes in of how do we, as a small independent film company, and focusing on documentary, which is not as a big seller in the industry as other films, how do we continue to be sustainable and continue to tell impactful stories? So my background really is at the intersection of journalism and business.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We'd love to know also what first sparked your interest in film and how that eventually led to you founding Splicer Films with the focus on social impact.
Excellent. Yeah, great question. Well, my interest in film really grew out of my journalism roots, as I mentioned earlier. I realized that, facts are all about informing people. Stories and films can really move them and touch them in meaningful ways that change perspectives and move hearts and minds and change, people's minds about things sometimes. And so I started Splicer Films because I wanted to move beyond just what might be reported in the news and really focus on stories that are really creating impact. So we started with Impact Productions. All of them are documentaries. I wanted to focus on real stories about real change makers. There are so many people out there whose stories are untold and underrepresented. And we thought, by focusing on stories that can really evoke emotion, we can kind of shift the narrative of what a hero in film and media looks like. And, we started to focus on underrepresented cultures and individuals who were really making a difference in the world, and they were inspiring us. And we thought they're going to inspire audiences to create a better world, which is really our mission here at Splicer Films.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's really interesting to see how those values are integrated into the films you produce, especially if you're not about, excuse my pronunciation, like Evelyn Kiomian and her journey bringing the Karate School project to Silicon.
Yes, I think it cut out a little bit, but I got the gist of it. I know that there was a question around Fear Not, one of our documentaries, and Evelyn Kiomian, who we spotlighted in that film, and what that really meant in terms of stories like hers that can inspire young women who are watching films. I believe that was the core of the question. For us, we wanted to spotlight a powerhouse like Evelyn because you don't see an African woman coming into the heart of Silicon Valley. You don't see that in films as the protagonist and the hero. And that was kind of I'm like, this is a story that must be told. She's a grassroots change maker, and her focus is really about breaking the cycle of poverty through education. And for me, I mean, it touched me personally because I grew up very impoverished, of very few resources. And what broke that cycle for me was education, and seeing her do that for young girls in her home village in Ivory Coast, but also, or Cote d'Ivoire, but also here when she moved to Silicon Valley here in Palo Alto, she realized there were people living in recreational vehicles, RV families that didn't have access to education because they didn't have an official zip code. For her, it was about really changing their path and providing education. So building a school in Africa in her home village, and then starting to expand the program of the Carrot School project here was really something that spoke to me. I remember being young and receiving help from nonprofits like hers, but oftentimes those were nonprofits that were maybe church focused or others. But when I saw a woman like Evelyn, I thought this is a story that we want to focus on. And really for young women, what we wanted them to see is that, you don't have to, your background really doesn't dictate your destiny or your destination. I want them to realize that leadership can start from just taking a single step forward, even when you're afraid and you're uncertain. And I think that Evelyn's story is one of those stories that is really the proof that one woman's vision can really make a difference. And what she's done has really bridged two worlds, the world here in Silicon Valley and US with Ivory Coast. So that is really a legacy that she's creating. And I hope that young women can see themselves in change makers like her when even she grew up in poverty. So it shows their resilience and their leadership in the face of adversity.
Yeah, I think having role models of women of color are really important, especially for us who are also women of color. And it's kind of a side note, but last year, I did a service trip to Guatemala where I helped build a school for people without education, and I really saw the impact that had on them. And I'm also going again this year to Guatemala to build. Yeah, so I'm really excited.
That's remarkable. It's great to hear those, starting at such a young age to be involved in meaningful causes.
Yeah, so our next question is, as a woman of color in the film industry, like, what challenges or moments of self-doubt have you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Thank you for that. I would say, as a woman of color in the film industry, I was also a new entrant in the film industry. And earlier we talked about like even thinking about what your career might look like, right? What your career choices are at such a young age. For me, a lot of the self-doubt came when I did a career pivot from being in technology sales and being a founder of a company to being a storyteller and a filmmaker. My self-doubt came when I thought, I didn't go to film school. I don't have a degree in film, but I want to tell these important stories. I can use my journalism degree and skills in telling them responsibly and authentically, but what about the film aspect? And so for me, it was a big shift and a pivot in my career. And what helped me navigate that, and advice I would give anyone, including you all, is, when you feel like you have doubt, find your tribe, find your group, right? I did a lot of that through women in film and video organizations like the National Association of Latino Independent Producers. So all of these professional organizations just really helped me find my place in the industry. And I would encourage anyone who maybe feel like maybe they're not, they're new to something, find your tribe, find professional mentors and professional groups that can really help you navigate maybe through some of that self-doubt and uncertainty. I also like to just kind of charge forward, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. You can navigate through it, and sometimes it gives you an advantage being a new entrant. So yeah, I think those organizations were really helping me navigate a new career and finding others that I can be a part of a larger movement of impact storytellers.
It's really great to hear that you were able to like find yourself in the film industry really nicely and how you navigated some moments of self-doubt and continued to push forward. And with that in mind, how do you hope to see the film industry evolve for specifically women in the next decade?
Yes, I know there's so much, thought around that of like women in film and, either having a seat at the table and, transitioning from that to owning the table. I think, I want to see more women, particularly women of color, in positions where they're funding films. They have the green lighting power, not just about being on the crew, but also being the CEO, executive producer, or even a distributor that's making key decisions of where do films like this go? Like where should they be seen? Especially impactful content. I think we see a lot of content out there that might not be as conducive to positivity and kindness and our society. And I would like to see, and I think that we are getting closer to that, women and female-led Latina produced films, and going beyond that being a niche category, but more an industry standard. So for me, I think having key decision makers in that field to bring these films and to broader audiences globally is going to be very important.
We actually recently had a film project at school about kind of spreading awareness and messages to people in 1-minute films. And the theme was, I think it was about like phone safety, but I think it would have been really nice to have it centered on women or like women of color and like what they go through. And on that note, thinking back to how you got to where you are today, we were wondering if you could go back and tell your high school self one thing, what would it be?
Oh, there's so many things. I think, finding resilience, being agile. I think that is important. Finding ways to navigate adversity and shifts in maybe what you already had planned. For me, I was a very planned individual. These kind of having that high achiever syndrome, wanting things to, go in a certain direction, having a plan. But I think the advice I'd give myself is just be open to changes and shifts. Be ready to, embrace your new interests. For me, that I thought, I remember being a junior or senior and thinking, I need to figure this out for the rest of my life. And the stress of like what I wanted to do was a little overwhelming. So my advice would be, make a decision. And I would say to you too, make a decision in your career or what you aim to do that really marries your passion and finding your purpose. But also be ready to pivot and change along the way. And that's okay.
I think that's really great advice. Now, as freshmen, I feel like a lot of our friends are already talking about college, what professions they want to do, like what summer programs they're trying to get into. And I think that advice is really important to just stick to your passion and do what you want with that.
On that note, were there any female role models who inspired you when you were growing up?
Yes, I would say, there, at a broader level, there were women that I'll start personally, my mom, my aunts, they were individuals who, showed a lot of grit and resilience, despite, maybe some of the challenges they were facing. But at a broader sense, I'd say, any women out there who were, kind of breaking barriers, not really seeing any limitations, but also those who looked at what they saw, glass half full and more opportunity, and focused on opportunities. So I'd say like, not just my family members, but some educators that I was, had the honor of being, of knowing at the University of Texas, who were really just showing me by how they lived, a lot of grit, and those that are quietly disruptive in their path of like knowing that, there are things that may not be established maybe as a standard for them, but finding their own path. So those are the women, my mom, my aunt, and my cousin Linda, who I think, we came from a small town, kind of coming out of our world and expanding into and newer horizons, and seeing that we could have a successful career despite coming from a small town. And so for me, it was a lot of that, people who demonstrate that grit and resilience.
Thank you so much for sharing. We're so lucky. We have our moms to look up to, all of our, like, just to give us advice and stuff when we want to figure things out, because obviously we're in high school and there's a lot of things we have to figure out. But on a, like, last question, we were wondering what inspired you to dive into your film Finding Ubuntu, and could you share what initially drew you to Mike's story, and what message would you want young women to take from his courage and resilience?
Sure. So Mike Mutej was just a remarkable individual who we met when we were first interviewing people we wanted to focus on when we thought we were going to be telling a story about COVID and how different people, various backgrounds, nationalities, socioeconomic levels, cultures were dealing with the same crisis. And we got to meet Mike while interviewing over 30 people across 5 continents. And what drew us to Mike was his sheer selflessness. So his story is that he was a Congolese refugee who lost everything. He lost his family, his home, in the conflict there in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And what really drew us to him is that when he was a refugee and arrived at a refugee camp, he realized that people have been suffering far longer than he had. And so he started to solve problems there, and he stepped up to serve the community despite what he was feeling himself and all of the loss that he had experienced. So he taught us about the Ubuntu philosophy. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's about our shared humanity. And it means I am because we are. And he learned that in his journey as a refugee, and really just, it touched us because it was about our interconnectedness, our interdependence as human beings. And, with his story, I wanted young women to see that resilience is not just about like toughing it out alone, because he was really in a dark place, but it's about finding strength in community. And Mike's courage really was showing us, when you really have nothing, you still have the power to help someone. And that was what true leadership, demonstrated through his journey. And that's why we were gravitating toward his story. So we titled it Finding Ubuntu because it was finding this new philosophy of Ubuntu. And that philosophy is taught at universities. We just got to screen the film at Michigan State University, and Mike is just, I think he's one of those really magnetic, people who demonstrates leadership despite, his own personal challenges.
Yeah, I think that philosophy unity is almost more important than ever. We all need to come together, and I think it's also really cool how you use journalism to create films with an impact that sparks hope. Because I look at the news and I just see a ton of things, and sometimes I just feel like giving up. But I love how your films want to change that.
Thank you. Yes, I'm so glad that you shared that, and I'm hopeful that more we bring our films to schools, because we want to help provide that sense of inspiration and bring these stories that give people a sense of hope, and they can see something different than maybe what's in a negative news cycle. I come from a journalism background where the term is if it bleeds, it reads, meaning people gravitate toward watching or seeing some of these negative things, but I don't think that should be a standard, especially for our younger generations. We need them to see films like Finding Ubuntu, Fear Not, A Divine Journey, all of our films that are intended to inspire the next generation of leaders. So I hope that that is a message that we can continue to bring forward to schools and academic institutions.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think I agree with like what you were saying, and Leah mentioned it a little bit. Like right now, there's a lot of polarization happening, and I think these films about unity and shared humanity, I am because we are, is really good way to break that cycle of polarization and just find a new perspective, which is really needed. And I think that about wraps it up. If there's anything you want to add or share, feel free.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'd love to share about some of our new projects on the horizon. We got to talk a little bit about our films that have released over the course of the last few years, but I'm excited to share with you all that we are going to be releasing 2 new films, and we're starting a new project. So one film is in partnership with the Magical Bridge Foundation, and that's based here in Palo Alto. And we are producing their documentary short that really explores the movement of design that is inclusive. And this is an inclusive playground that is really reimagining public spaces. And it's very innovative and thinking about people of all abilities and ages and anyone from different backgrounds so that they really feel that they belong. So that's a short documentary we hope to bring to film festivals in the area and also to schools, because the Magical Bridge Playground started here in Palo Alto, but they now are global. We're also working to release a film about a wildlife sanctuary in Ramona, California called Critter Encounters, A Forever Home. And it's about animals that cannot return to the wild because of human interference. And so it's really a beautiful story about second chances. And it's where animals become ambassadors to educate people about conservation and coexistence. And lastly, we're going to be filming coming up soon the Project Awareness and Special Sports called PASS. And this is an organization that started in Mill Valley. As you can see the pattern, we're always spotlighting a change maker, a founder who faced a challenge and is now solving it in their community. And the founder is a mom of a special needs young boy who is neurodivergent, and he didn't have as much access to sports and recreation. And so her 11-year-old son, who is neurotypical, said, to his mom, why don't we start an organization? So it was really an interesting journey about Janet Miller and her son, Tyler, who started this organization to help youth feel like they can be involved in sports despite, their physical or, invisible disabilities. And she hopes to get people to start bringing this to their own communities. And she's all about radical inclusion and making sports accessible to youth with special needs. So hopefully we'll get to screen that for you all, and we invite you to some of our premieres coming up.
Thank you so much for sharing, especially with sports like these days. And it's such a competitive and environment. And I think it's so important to be able to include everyone, because if you look at a lot of high level teams, it's all just like very, very high pressure, which doesn't leave a lot of space for fun anymore. And I think that's really important, especially today.
Lastly, I'd love to share, I'm just very impressed with your group at Spark, taking initiative and spotlighting important stories, and just really congratulate you on your first podcast. Thank you again for having me, and best wishes as you continue on your journey with Spark.
Miss King, thank you so much for sharing your inspiring story and passion for filmmaking with us.
We're so grateful you joined us for our very first episode of Sparked, and we hope to talk to you again soon.
And to all of our listeners, we can't wait to share more stories of incredible women.
Thank you!